Right. Okay, so welcome everyone to our first afternoon session of day 2. I am Dr. Molly Hollinger, Assistant Professor and Interim Chair of the Creativity and Change Leadership Department at Buffalo State. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Zorana Ivcevic Pringle, who was actually our keynoter a couple years ago at CEE, so you may already be familiar with her from that. And we are thrilled to have her back talking about her new book today, which is called The Creativity Choice, and I believe is available for pre-order. Is that right?
It's available for pre-order. It's coming out on May 6th.
Wonderful. So I'm sure she'll tell us more about that. So she is a senior research scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, where she currently serves as the director of the Creativity and Emotions Lab. I really can't think of a cooler title than that. And she studies the role of emotion and emotional intelligence in creativity and well-being, a topic that is dear to my heart as well. And I know many of you who are here in the room today. She has previously served as associate editor of Psychology, Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts, the International Journal of Creativity and Problem Solving, and is currently the associate editor at the Creativity Research Journal. She has edited the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity and Emotions, is co-editor of Crisis, Creativity, and Innovation, and has published in numerous journals such as Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, Journal of Personality, Applied Cognitive Psychology, Creativity Research Journal, Journal of Creative Behavior, and others, and also publishes in popular press outlets such as the Harvard Business Review, ArtNet, US News, Education Week, Science Daily, El Paris, and others. And she also received the Award of Excellence in Research from the Mensa Education and Research Foundation, the Berlin Award for Outstanding Early Career Achievement from the Society for Psychology, Aesthetics, and the Arts, Creativity in the Arts, and has been elected a Fellow of the American Psychological Association. And as I mentioned, her talk today centers around the concept in her forthcoming book, The Creativity Choice, which I know has been a true labor of love for you, and also you put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So I just want to say a huge congratulations on the publications. And I will certainly be one at the forefront to order that and be first in line. So congratulations again. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Ivcevic.
Thank you, Molly, very much. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. Great to see everyone here. And I want to get us started. So I want to talk to you today. What do we do with an idea? What is the process like from having an idea to making them happen? This is something that I have extensively written about and researched about and kind of packaged it all together in this upcoming book, The Creativity Choice. So I love this cartoon, the New Yorker cartoon. It's a cocktail scene, and one lady says, "Did you know that it was Harry who came up with the idea for the daiquiri?" And with the blank looks, she says, "Well, he just never did anything with it." And we all sometimes have ideas that we don't follow through on because we cannot possibly do everything we have an idea about. But we also laugh at this because we recognize it. We recognize it at people, sometimes in ourselves, people around us. And we just wonder what's going on, what's the difference between those who have ideas and do something with them and those who do not. As I was way back in the last century when I was a graduate student, I read this very influential for me article by Bob Sternberg that said creativity is a decision. And I really wondered what that meant and what were implications of that. And it was one of those things that never left me. But then I also saw something that I thought was very similar in nature from Matisse, who said creativity takes courage. I tend to think that these two ideas are essentially different sides of the same coin. Creativity is a decision and the kind of decision that takes courage. And I will develop that as I talk. And when we have an idea, so imagine you have an idea for a new app. You start with a blank screen. Down the road, there is an app that is fully developed. These are screenshots from an app that we develop at the center where I work. It's called How We Feel, and it's a education and diary for your daily feelings. So I am interested in what happens in between. What happens from having that idea, but starting with a blank page in the process of its development and that final product in hand. And so if we kind of backtrack and say, okay, you want to end up with that product, how do we backtrack it and take it apart? Well, there is you as an individual creator. Then there are teams. Oftentimes we work with teams, or otherwise, even when something is seemingly solitary activity, like writing that book, we are influenced by others. And it takes time. This is a process that takes time. And we start with a blank screen, with a vision, with something that is perhaps an idea or a beginning of an idea. Then we generate possible ideas or solutions. We select something that is most promising. And then there's a lot of jumping over hurdles. Because the creative process is just about never smooth by nature, because we are trying to do something original, new, that hasn't been done before. Of course, we don't have a blueprint. And throughout this process, there are emotions that happen. There is an emotional roller coaster. But these emotions are not just in the way as we often think of them. There is power in the emotions that can be inspirational, that can be used in the service of the creative process. But sometimes we also, of course, have to manage them because they get in our way and they become overwhelming. All of this to get to that final part. So today, I want to say, okay, this is a lot. So let's focus on three big kinds of questions: the what, the how, and the when. So the what of what is necessary to get us started on that path. How do we make that our creative work successful? How do we jump through those hurdles and persist in the long process? And when, under what circumstances, our creativity is not going to be a one-hit wonder? How do we make this reliable? So starting with that first question, what is it that helps us make the choice to do something with our idea or ideas? And the big problem there, why that Harry from the story never did anything with his idea for the daiquiri, is that, well, it was risky. There are psychological risks that are involved in pursuing an idea. And there are particularly two kinds of psychological risks. First one is the intellectual risk. I love this quote from Picasso, who said that I am always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. That is an intellectual risk. You don't know how to do something, you are doing it anyway. So you are not starting with confidence necessarily. You are starting with the desire to learn, but there is some risk that you might not be able to succeed. The other kind of risk is reputational risk. And I was very, very curious about this kind of risk in my own research. And we started study with young people, with high school students, because they are particularly sensitive to these kinds of social cues. And we wanted to see what goes on in people's minds as they are considering whether they're going to share their ideas. And we found three kinds of thoughts, three kinds of concerns. One is summarized as people might think my ideas are silly. So this is what we called anticipating negative social consequences of creativity and sharing our ideas. This is outward oriented. You are worried how your ideas might be perceived by others. Are you going to anger them? Are they going to ridicule you? And so on. The other concern is more inward oriented. And that one is kind of summarized as sharing ideas makes me self-conscious. So now you have this outside concern, but then you are taking it inward and you become self-conscious, you become anxious, and this turns into anxious risk avoidance, desire to just be safe, rather safe than sorry. But then there is a third kind of thought and third kind of consideration, and that is one of valuing creativity. Valuing creativity that trumps everything else. Creativity is important to who I am as a person. And I am willing to do things and embark on processes and kinds of work that is necessary, even in spite of some things being uncomfortable or unpleasant. So you are probably now thinking, well, what about creative confidence? These risks can put doubts into your mind. And you are totally right. We think of creative confidence, we think of creative self-efficacy, and we know that we tend to do those things for which we believe we can do them. So how do we reconcile this? Well, we reconcile it by considering creative confidence in a little bit different light. First is creative confidence is not an either or proposition. It's not either you have it or you do not have it. We have it to a certain extent. And that can be more, that can be less. But importantly, it is not constant. It is not that you always, at all times, even working on the same project, believe that that you can do it. Rogelio Puente Diaz in Mexico has done wonderful studies when he followed people as they are working on a long-term, like semester-long project, and asked them at different times about their confidence. And he found that people start with lots of doubts. You do not start without doubt. But then they build confidence as they make progress. You make progress, you think, okay, well, I have done something, so I can do something else. And your confidence grows through engagement, through activity, through making that progress. And of course, I mentioned that creative work is oftentimes an emotional roller coaster. So this is not a straight trajectory from less to more either. There are times when we have more doubts. There are times of creative blocks. There are times when a certain part of the process is just not taking shape, and those doubts overwhelm you temporarily. So remember, as your confidence ebbs and flows, that's normal. That is not indicative of your inability to be creative. It is an emotional part of the process that has its its ups and downs. And that brings us to the second big question. Okay, now you have accepted that there are going to be some psychological risks. You are not necessarily a natural born risk taker or thrive on taking risks. That's not necessary, but you accepted them and you are willing to deal with them. And you understand that, well, your confidence is going to grow through the process. So you are now in better shape than Harry, and you have decided to do something with your idea. Now the question is, well, it takes time, and there are going to be ups and downs. What do you need to know to persist in this process? And we come back to that idea that creativity is an emotional roller coaster. And I want to spend some time on this because that is oftentimes not discussed when we talked about creativity. We talk about creative thinking, we talk about creative problem solving. These are all very cognitive aspects. And people who study creative thinking and creative problem solving know their emotional aspects to it. We just sometimes put them a little bit in the back seat, and I want to bring them up front. So we have done this study where we asked a group of professionals from various domains, and there were some that were directly in the arts, they were designers, they were writers. There was a very broad set of domains represented. And we asked them what happens emotionally in that process of daily work. So you have your idea, you're making, you are doing what it takes to develop it and to bring it to fruition. And they said all kinds of things. So there is lots that goes on. There is certainly joy and happiness and excitement of creation. And oftentimes we tend to talk about that a lot, but we don't talk about, in my opinion, enough about the frustration that also happens because creativity is hard. Creativity has to be hard. If you are really trying to do something new, something original, it has to be hard because you cannot just repeat something you have done before or somebody else has done before. And then I also did a different kind of analysis where I said, well, this was a study that was specific to creative industries, professionals in creative industries. What if we asked a group that is representative of the economy at large? So across all industries, and this study was more than 14,000 workers across the US, representing all industries, like their proportion in the economy. And we assessed their creativity, and we also asked a bunch of questions about their emotional experiences of work. And then we were able to compare those who have lots of creativity in their work and those who do not. And this is the top creators across different industries. What are their typical experiences of work? They are happy at work, but there is also, again, that stress and frustration. Those are real. It's not creative work is sometimes fun, oftentimes fun, but also very difficult. And we have to acknowledge that so that we don't misinterpret difficulties as a sign that we are not able to do it. And speaking of that frustration that I mentioned before, we asked people also, what happens when you encounter a creative block? Everybody agrees that sometimes you encounter a creative block. What are your feelings at that time? And pretty much frustration. Frustration is the number one thing that happens for everybody. Now, that frustration can be tinged with anxiety and doubt, or can be tinged with fear or disappointment or anger. That's going to be different for different people. Personality matters too. But that frustration is an overwhelming experience when we are encountering creative block. And we do encounter creative blocks. So, okay, all these things happen emotionally. So what do we do with those emotions? And in the beginning, I have mentioned that we can use emotions and we can also manage emotions. Those are two different kinds of processes, and they take two different kinds of skills. And one seems counterintuitive, harnessing the power of emotions. So we are saying emotions have some power in them. They can be beneficial, they can be helpful. But how does that happen? What does that mean? And for us to use the power of emotions, we have to start with where emotion scientists start. And emotion scientists consider emotions as information. They are telling us something about what's going on in our mind, what's our state of mind, and what are our concerns. And it's also telling us something what's going on in our environment, in the world around us. And different feelings give us different messages. So for example, being happy tells us everything is good. Everything is cheery, happy, you are making progress, everything is good. You do not have to have concerns. Well, what does that frustration mean? Well, frustration means that there's an obstacle in the way, and you cannot continue if you want to make progress in the same way that you did before. Now, what do you do with that information becomes a question. Emotions, different feelings are also related to different ways of thinking. And we are better able to think in different ways when experiencing different emotions. So for example, we are all familiar, very kind of viscerally familiar, that when you're feeling more optimistic, you see the world through rose-colored glasses, and you think that good things are going to happen and that things are not as bad or things are actually going well. When you're feeling more pessimistic, it's the opposite. You are anticipating negative things to happen. You can see problems that otherwise you might not be able to see. And it turns out that other feelings have these connections with different ways of thinking. In happy moods, we are very good at broad thinking and quick idea generation. So if you are in a brainstorming session, really helpful to be in a happy, highly energized mood. And if we have this knowledge about the nature of emotions, we can put it to work. So we can match what we are working on at any particular time to our current feeling. Well, to a certain extent, of course. Sometimes, to a certain extent, under some circumstances, we have an ability to choose what we are working on when. And when you have that choice, you can do this kind of matching game of, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and these are all the things on my to-do list. I am a researcher and academic, and I oftentimes have this ability to choose what I'm doing at different times. So personally, I am not a morning person. Saying that I'm not a morning person is a severe understatement. Anybody in my household knows that. I wake up grumpy. No matter the circumstances, I wake up grumpy. But that turns out is useful for certain kinds of thinking. So when you are grumpy, you are seeing everything that is wrong with the world. So I start my day by using the power of my grumpiness to work on tasks that require critical thinking, that require me to figure out all that is wrong with something that I have previously done to make it better. So in the morning, I critically read what I have previously written, and I find all the problems with it. At another time, I can make it better, but at that time, I can find the wrong things. Sometimes we, of course, cannot choose what we are doing at particular time. So this talk was scheduled at a particular time, and I cannot then change it and say, you know, I'm not in the mood for this or that. Of course, right? And a lot of our life is like that we cannot particularly choose. And at those times, we can generate emotions to fit our tasks. So we can put ourselves in a particular mood uh, using, you know, handy strategies. Oftentimes, uh, music works. Um, and you can put some music that is energizing for you if you need to get in a brainstorming situation, for example. And we all have some personal strategies that work for us individually. And you can just kind of create your own mood in the ways that work for you. But I am not going to pretend that all emotions are helpful at all times. There are times when our emotions can become overwhelming, or otherwise they can get in our way for whatever reason. They are not matching well the situation, and we have to manage them somehow. We have to do something about them. And this can seem almost funny, like, how do you mean we are going to do something about our emotions? We do have agency over emotions. We can have strategies to make ourselves feel better or feel something different, or change the course of our feelings with a toolkit of strategies that we can use. And that's very important for all those times, like those creative blocks when you are so overwhelmed with frustration that you cannot make any progress. When that is just screaming in your head and everywhere around you. So emotion scientists have really taken apart the process of emotions happening. So how do emotions even emerge? And then said, well, knowing that, we can do something about them. We can sort of intervene at each of these steps of the emotion progression. So how we end up feeling some emotion, it can seem to us that it's automatic and instantaneous. But if we were able to take a slow motion camera and slow it down enough, we would see that it starts with certain kinds of situations. They are situations that trigger different kinds of feelings. And their trigger, I don't mean it in the popular culture sense. I mean it as just something happens. It can be good, it can be bad, it can be anything in between. It's some kind of event to which we have a reaction. But events in our lives can be complex. And if you've ever been in a situation that you are there with multiple people, and afterwards you realize people have different reactions to the same situation, it can be really perplexing, like, were you in the same situation as me? But people have different reactions because they focus on different aspects of a situation. And even as something happens, we are not automatically feeling something like situation reaction. There's also this cognitive component of what kinds of meanings we attach to a situation. What does it mean for us? What does it signal to us? And finally, there are those reactions, kinds of behaviors, facial expressions, our physical reactions, our cognitive reactions to it. So if we take this apart, what can we do along this way? Well, the best kind of regulation of emotions is regulating it before it even happens, not even getting into situations that are really difficult, if possible. And that we can do by selecting situations, by choosing some kinds of situations and not others. So when you are leaning into your strengths, you are selecting situations that are going to be easier for you, at which you are better, that are going to be easier to handle, and you're going to be better at handling. So that is an example of selecting a situation. But you cannot always select, of course. You don't always have a choice. And at those times, you can change something about the situation. So there are people who are really afraid of public speaking. That is actually one of the top anxieties that people experience according to some research. And you might still have to speak in public for one reason or another. A way to change that anxiety experience is, well, perhaps you are going to rehearse it up front. So you are going to rehearse your presentation in such a manner that you are very sure of it, that you are feeling in control of it. But we also can decide to, emotion scientists call it emotional deployment. I think it's a very funny term, to focus on different aspects of a situation. And the power of this is very clear when we realize that we have noticed something that somebody else did not notice. So we have really latched onto a comment by a coworker or a team member that other people did not even notice that was said in passing, but we latched on it. Well, perhaps we do not have to pay as much attention to it. And then there is how we look at something. The cognitive change. How do we change about ways of thinking about a situation? So imagine a situation that you are in a meeting and it's a idea generation meeting and ideas are flying. The ideas are flying, it's exciting, and it is the really stimulating time. And oftentimes when there's lots of excitement, people end up kind of almost talking over each other. And somebody jumps in a way that seems to kind of jump over you. Well, how are you going to interpret it? You are going to have a different emotional experience if you say this person is purposefully talking over me, or if you say this person is taken by the excitement of the moment. If you think the person was taken by the excitement of the moment, it's not going to feel like an individual attack or like a disrespectful event. And if you think that they are really purposefully talking over you, it's going to be a very unpleasant experience. And finally, we have the ability to modulate our response. Sometimes that is just biting your tongue in the moment because you know that in the moment it is too difficult and that you might say something that you would not otherwise wish to say. Or it may be taking a deep breath or 10 in an anxiety-provoking situation. So you're trying to change something about how you are reacting in a situation. And all of these emotion tools, both working with emotions and the power of them and trying to change them and regulate them as they happen if they are in the way, are going to help you through those ups and downs, emotional ups and downs of the creative process. And my final question in this presentation is, well, when is one-time creativity going to become consistent creativity? How are you not going to be just a one-hit wonder? And it turns out that the difference here is the social side of creativity. And creativity is social even when it does not seem to be. So I wrote a book. I was the only one writing the book. So it seems, well, it's an individual task, and it is an individual task in that sense. But there are, of course, influences. And our social ties are going to help us through the creative process in different ways. Our weak ties are acquaintances, those people we don't talk to very often, can have different perspectives. We don't know what their perspectives are because we don't talk to them very often. And Malcolm Gladwell probably gets a lot of credit for saying that our acquaintances, not our friends, are our greatest source of new ideas and information. And he's totally right. The research done on this is by a professor at Emory University, Jill Perry Smith, who has done this lovely research in asking where ideas are coming from and identifying where in our social circles we tend to get inspiration and new perspectives. But ideas are not enough, right? With just ideas, we are like Harry. So it turns out that not just weak ties are important, but also our strong ties, our friends, family, close co-workers. What they do is that help us elaborate. They help us with our idea development. Okay, now you have those new perspectives. How do you put them together? And this really clever research with people working in dyads and being paired with either a weak tie or a strong tie found that and just kind of recording what the conversations look like. Your weak ties are just giving you more ideas, constantly giving new ideas. But your strong ties are saying, oh, that's a great idea you have. Have you considered this aspect of it? Or how can we take it next step? How can we build on it? And it turns out, of course, you need both. You need both. Different kinds of relationships are going to help different stages of the creative process. We need to reach out to the right kinds of connections at different times. But to get from idea to doing something with it, you are going to need both. And I want to end my talk today with a little bit about leading for creativity. I think that many of you are very intimately interested in how do we support creativity of others. And I work at a place called Center for Emotional Intelligence, and emotional intelligence are the abilities to perceive emotions accurately, to use them to help thinking and problem solving, like I talked earlier today, understand the causes and consequences of emotions, and manage our emotions, regulate our emotions. So when we studied how this happens and what the consequences of this are, in a series of research studies, I asked questions that are really getting to these abilities and said, okay, when you think about your supervisor, the most immediate manager, the leader that you most interact with, do they realize when people are dissatisfied at work? Do they help people channel frustrations into constructive change? Do they understand how their decisions affect others? Do they help people feel better when they are disappointed? And then we compared what is the experience of work of those whose supervisors are really good at these things and those who are not. And this is what happens. So people, there's, of course, a lot of overlap in how people experience work. And there are certain kinds of experiences that are just normal experiences of work. Sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are stressed, sometimes we feel good, sometimes we feel accomplished, and so on, right? These are, no matter who you work around, those are going to be happening routinely. But what's more interesting is to see, okay, if your supervisor is not acting in emotional intelligent ways, what happens then? Well, then your experience of work is that you are unappreciated, underappreciated, and all these feelings about anger, from annoyed and irritated to mad. And on the other side, we have motivation-related feelings. you love your work, you are fulfilled by it, you are challenged, motivated, enjoy it. You see how different these feel? Because leaders have a disproportionate influence on how we experience work. And they are setting the tone. They are creating opportunities for us to feel psychological safety, feel that safety that we can share ideas, um, but we are not going to be harshly criticized, reprimanded, or punished for them. And that is the number one social fertilizer of creativity happening and creativity happening consistently. I want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I'm going to pause here and say thank you. Here is my contact information. Please get in touch if you would like to chat in any way, one-on-one or otherwise. And the book is coming out on May 6th, and you can pre-order it here if you would like. And I'm going to open just a few minutes for questions, Molly, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, let's dive right in because we do just have a couple of minutes, but let's give a quick round of applause before we do. Thank you so much. That was really incredible. And lots of head nodding. So first of all, this is actually a comment, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, that uh, David was surprised that loneliness didn't show up more in emotions. So what would you say about that?
I think that's a great question. I think that loneliness is something that we look at retrospectively. So when we look back, we can say, okay, uh, I am feeling lonely in this part of my life or in this aspect of my life. But we ask people specifically in relation to their work, and then it doesn't come up because you are not focusing on that.
Hmm.
So it's not that it doesn't happen, it is that what you focus on.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
but beautiful question. We had other research on loneliness that was very counterintuitive because of that reason.
Well, we have a very perceptive audience here. So another interesting question was, what are your thoughts on how the habitual language we use to describe our emotions can actually shape our emotional experiences?
Um, Yeah, I think that the habitual language is really interesting because when you think of how do you answer the question, how are you? In our culture today, we tend to say things like, I'm okay, which doesn't mean anything. It just means you don't want to answer the question. Um, or you say, I'm busy or I'm stressed. Those are socially acceptable answers in our culture. And we don't really pause to identify what we are feeling. But if we are not going to pause, we are not going to identify that information that emotion is conveying. And we need to pause first and say what's going on, especially if we are experiencing any kind of challenge, because we need information to make decisions, right? It's very simple for people to think of when we make decisions, we need information to base those decisions on. Uh, but we don't know that emotions provide the kind of information. So you have to decode that information first.
Okay, why don't we take one more question? So you've been working on a book, which is obviously a creative project, and you mentioned one strategy that you used, which was if you're not a morning person, so you are aware of your emotions and engage in more critical thinking at that point in the day. Is there just one other strategy or technique that you would recommend from your experience with your book?
Uh, do it. Buckle up and do it. It There are times when you are not going to feel like it, and the one of my favorite authors has talked about the experience of creative block and said, well, sometimes you experience it, but then you can try to do some strategies, but sometimes even when you use very advanced strategies and strategies that otherwise work, there are times when they don't work. And at those times, you still have to sit and you still have to try. Maybe normally you write 1,000 words in a day. And maybe on those bad days, you're going to manage 200, only 200. But 200 is much more than nothing. And he also said, well, a year later, when you look at what you have written through long period, you can't even tell what was written on a good day and on a bad day. So remember that sometimes you just have to do it and spend the time, and even it's 200 words, it is something.
Oh, perfect. I think that's a great note to end on and matches with your book, The Creativity Choice. So thank you so much, Zorana. Wonderful talk. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And you have her contact information, so please feel free to follow up with her with questions, and enjoy your last session of the day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. I'm happy to connect in any way. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.